It was a project the others said just couldn't be done, so it was a real challenge for architects Johnston Mark Lee when they were building this house in Southern California, perched literally on a cliffside in Pacific Palisades. Hill House is the ultimate house on the hill. Sharon, Mark, this is a project with a long and kind of complex history. Give me the shortened version, Mark, please.
Well, we were commissioned around 2000 by a developer who acquired this piece of land and asked us to build a speculative house, a single family house on this lot. And this was the only virgin lot that was available on this street, which has a tremendous view of the canyon. And other architects and other developers had tried and failed. So we were facing a tremendous amount of difficulty.
I think really the difference is that our project really took the kind of parameters of this particular site, the conditions of the slope, the nature of the property line, and used all of those limitations in a way to generate the form of the house, instead of sort of importing a style of architecture onto this lot.
So we've got a very tight and constricted site, plus the fact that it's got this incredible slope. But in addition to this, Mark, it's becoming increasingly difficult to build large houses on the hills around Los Angeles because of local ordinance. Explain to me what that's about. Where does that come from?
Well, I think it started around the early 90s when the city was reacting to overcrowding on hillsides in areas such as Hollywood Hills, where there are tremendous views, but then every steep lot are being built on. So the city basically imposed a new set of ordinances that makes it much more difficult to build on hillsides.
They just don't want houses over a certain height. They don't want you within a certain distance of your property line.
But I think the main intention is to preserve the profile of the hill.
Does this mean that the large, extravagant, 20,000 square foot, 6-story home hanging off, the Hollywood Hills, that's over now? That era is over?
Yeah, I mean, surveying even across the canyon here from Hill House, a lot of the houses you see wouldn't be built today.
Explain to us some of the difficulties that architects and builders encounter when they're building on a site that's so steep as this.
One of the real challenges of this lot was that it's small, and there wasn't a lot of area for staging of trucks and laying out of materials. But really the builders were quite successful in sort of like an orchestra, orchestrating tractors getting into the ground to dig the holes. And then once the groundwork was done, cranes were brought in, dropping all the kind of structural elements that were going into the ground. So that added a lot of, kind of cost and complexity to the project.
So, Mark, what's actually in the ground?
There are 9 caissons. They're basically concrete pillars. So it's like a tree, basically. What you see underground is pretty much as big or as tall as what's above ground. The caissons go vertically into the hill, but sitting on top of these great beams are 2 sloping walls. We realized that by angling it perpendicular to the hill, it actually behaves structurally more efficient.
And then what about the rest of the house?
Our goal in terms of the form of the house was, on the one hand, maximize windows where we had great views and then minimize them adjacent to streets. So we really used steel where we had to because we had great spans, and wood where we just had infill.
Mark, can you give us a quick tour of the house?
Basically, one enters in the middle level, which is this wide open living room, open dining room, and open kitchen. And then one takes the stair downstairs into this master suite, which has basically the master bedroom, breakfast room, and a closet, and a master bathroom. And one takes the stair upstairs from the living room into a second bedroom as well as a library. And as we were designing the house, we made the provision that if someone wants to close off the third level for a third bedroom, that's also possible.
The entire building is actually clad in a very unusual material. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
We needed to find a material that could work in a vertical application as well as a horizontal or sloping application. And we eventually found a material called Grail Coat. And it's, in a way, has a look quite a bit like stucco, but it's actually very thin, and it's a waterproof material, and it's very flexible. So the other thing that is really important to the overall look of a house is that there's no control joints. Typically in a house, every 8 to 10 feet you would have a joint to prevent cracking, but because this material is so flexible, we didn't need any other detailing.
Explain to me a little bit about some of the things you had to take on board in terms of the local environment and also building in Los Angeles. I mean, it has a very specific type of climate.
Well, I think on the one hand there were things that were legislated by zoning codes that we had to do that have to do with the ground, and then there was also kind of atmosphere for the house and the sort of capturing the nature of the site. There's a lot of concern that you landscape the site and mitigate any water going off of your property, which could potentially cause a landslide. And then while you basically can't see it, there's a whole network of pipes and drains in the ground that collect all the water and pump it back up to the street. And then within the house, we really, as we were thinking about windows, views, apertures, and airflow through the house, we were really mindful of how we could develop the house it could really open and close throughout the day. And so the current owner basically never uses the heating and cooling because she's able to open windows downstairs and get air to move all the way up and flow out through the library. And one of the things that we knew we really needed to capitalize on was to really bring the outside into the house. We knew that, of course, there's a lot of houses in this canyon that are beautiful, but a lot of them are built in a way, I mean, they address the view, but they don't necessarily open up to the landscape.
It's a very unusual house in that you weren't actually working for a client. Somebody else was generating this programming. I just can't even really imagine how you would approach that type of work.
Well, I think there are pros and cons of working without a client. Sometimes having a client, there's certain specificity that the client or he or she wants, and basically you react to it, and then good architecture is born from that. But also sometimes the client could be so demanding that you have to double as his or her psychiatrist. You know, that could be a major problem. But for this lot here, we know it will be for a single person or for a couple. And with the construction, with the view, with the spatial qualities, we decided to make the interior very loft-like and very open.
I guess I'm wondering if at some point in the design process you are actually designing a house for yourself.
Well, honestly, we never thought of it, but we tried to design the house that could accommodate very different tastes or lifestyles. We always think that a successful house, you could put very different furniture in it, and it still has that quality, whether it be a modern Barcelona chair or Victorian furniture.
It must be a sort of a life milestone as an architect to have a house of your design sitting in this area, this part of the world, you know, amongst houses designed by other really, really well-known architects. It must be very exciting for a young architect, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely a big leap for us to take this on. I mean, even for our initial client to hire us, they sensed something in our work and took a chance.
The best architecture in Los Angeles are all residential houses. So there's a lot of pressure for us when we design the house that we know we'll be in such company. Yeah.
We've seen since the completion of this house, other houses on hillsides that have in a way really emulated this project. And for us, it was exciting that we could sort of set precedent for building on lots that people wouldn't have even considered building on before.
So Mark, how do you see this house fitting in the tradition of residential construction in Los Angeles?
Well, I think Los Angeles architecture is in a very interesting moment right now. I think it's still a very creative place, an exciting place. On the other hand, I also think that Los Angeles is not really the Wild West that a lot of people perceive from the outside, you know, where maybe it was 20 years or 30 years ago. There are a lot more restrictions and restraints. Clients don't always just come to us and ask for the most wildest, expressionist type of space. So I think our generation of architects are also more responsible and thinking more about how the city will evolve.
Hill House is the latest in the long line of iconic hillside houses in the Los Angeles area, which goes back to include some classic works by people like Richard Neutra and others from the mid-20th century. But there is a change from that earlier phase of building. I think that mid-20th century architecture sort of embodied the glamour of old Hollywood. It had a sense of exclusivity and opulence about it. And you can see here today that things have changed. Architects Sharon and Mark are very down-to-earth people, building modest, pragmatic houses in a socially responsible way. Now, why does it matter? It matters because what happens in Los Angeles in terms of residential design has a huge effect and a huge influence on what happens in other parts of the world. So what you see here today, you can soon expect to see somewhere near you.